The first way is that they can withdraw from each other. That is, a person may be there in body but not in mind, which is the old Tom Sawyer situation where the boy's in the schoolroom but his mind is out at the old swimming hole, and for all practical purposes he's not in the schoolroom. And that we call withdrawal. That's one thing people can do. The second is what we call rituals. Ritual is a very standardized series of exchanges which doesn't convey any information but kind of an act of recognition. Like hello, hello, or what's new, or how are things, and looks like rain, and it doesn't really, the content of what's said doesn't really mean very much. It's just the fact that the people are recognizing each other, and that makes people feel good, and that's healthy.
And the answers are all standardized.
They tend to be pretty well standardized. For instance, if I say to you, looks like rain, and you're supposed to answer yes, and if you answered no, that would throw us off, and we'd have to kind of do a double take and figure out what kind of a conversation to have. But if you just say yes, then you're really saying to me, yeah, you're okay, and we move on to the next exchange. So the answers are standardized. Then the next step is, after people have gone through rituals, is what we call pastimes, which are not quite as standardized as rituals, but they give the person a feeling, perhaps, that they're saying something that they really mean or that's original, but actually they are fairly well standardized. Our classical example is a pastime called General Motors, which people play at cocktail parties or wherever they may be.
What's that one?
Well, that's, one guy says, I like a Ford Chevrolet or Plymouth, and you choose one, better than a Ford Chevrolet or Plymouth, and you choose one, because, and then you complete in 25 words, and then the other guy says, oh yeah, but I like, and he chooses one of the three, and completes his sentence in 25 words. There are various pastimes. If you go to a cocktail party, generally the people get off in corners, and in each corner they're playing one pastime. For instance, the young mothers are off in the corner playing what we call PTA, like how do you bring up children. And actually there are two kinds of PTA. There's the kind that says, what's the matter with children? And then there's a kind that says, am I a good mother? And usually those two kinds don't mix, like they tend to stay in separate corners at the cocktail party.
Right.
Well, those are what we call pastimes. Nothing really much is happening. It's kind of a polite exchange of opinions. After people play pastimes for a while, they can go off in two directions. One would be an activity, what people ordinarily call work. That is, doing arithmetic, talking about factual things, about how to bring up children, for example, building a boat. That's another thing people can do when they're in a room together or in a place together. Or they can go into games. Games is where the action begins. Pastimes are just what they sound like, just a way of filling in the time while you get acquainted with people. But games are real action. People get real satisfactions out of them. Usually the satisfactions are rather odd and possibly even gruesome. They don't sound like satisfactions, but the reason people play games is that they get certain satisfactions from it. Satisfactions are things like guilt feelings, anger, hurt feelings, fear, feelings of inadequacy, and it seems strange that people would want to get those feelings, but they do. After games, the next step would be a game-free relationship, which we call intimacy. People have been trying to define intimacy for really 5,000 years, and I think we've come about as close as anybody. We say intimacy is a game-free, candid, frank relationship. I don't mean by this sexual intimacy, because sex could fit into any of these categories. For instance, as everybody knows, there's ritualistic sex and there's pastime sex. By intimacy, we mean more just the way it's defined, a game-free relationship in which people are talking straight to each other. And that's the best kind, and everybody has a kind of hunger for intimacy. But they're also afraid of it. It's really very scary. And one of the functions of games is to get a degree of intimacy without getting too close. So games are, on the one hand, a barrier against intimacy because games are kind of underhanded and they're exploiting people, and that's the opposite of intimacy. In intimacy, nobody's exploiting anybody. But on the other hand, games do give a certain kind of closeness, which may be all that most people can stand. Now, the point about these 6 ways of structuring time is, that interests us in our research work is, that as far as we know, those are the only 6 ways there are. For instance, we might say to somebody now, you two have to talk to each other or sit beside each other, and you must have no rituals, no activities, no pastimes, no games, and you mustn't withdraw. And then see what they come up with. And the only thing they can come up with is the 6th one, which is intimacy. So that's one way to get people to get intimate very quickly. And it's also a way to demonstrate how scary intimacy is to most people.
Then the 6 ways of structuring time are rituals, pastimes, activities, games, intimacy, and if all else fails, withdrawal.
Now, this coast is just absolutely beautiful. In the midst of all this, it's sort of hard to think of all bad games. Is there any such thing as a good game?
Well, existentially, all games are bad because they involve a con and they're not straight. But some games seem to end up pretty well for both parties. For instance, the game of Cavalier is one of those, where the man pays the girl extravagant compliments as though he were really interested in her, but what he's really interested in is making the compliments poetic. So he feels good and she feels good, no harm done. Or in the busman's holiday game, where the man says, I'm really over here just on a holiday, but I kind of want to help you with your work, and there's a con there because actually he planned to help the other fellow with his work before he ever started out. So everybody feels pretty good. And I suppose in that sense, those are good games.
You use the word con and payoff. Is there a definite structure in every game?
Right. The thing that I'm very anxious for get across to you, Dave, is that a game is something very specific. It's not just something that people do over and over. It has to have 3 characteristics: a con, a gimmick, and a payoff. Now, the con is a kind of a cheating, where the person says, I'm trying to do one thing, but they're really trying to do something else. This is in the old con game, where the con man would say, I'm here to help you make some money, but he was really there to take the guy's money away. The gimmick is the weakness which makes the other person play the game. For example, in the game of I'm only trying to help you, the person who plays that has a weakness for helping people. And so if you want to con them, you have to say, I need help, and then you got them hooked. That's the gimmick that you hook them with. And the payoff is the feelings that people get out of playing the game. We call those trading stamps. For instance, in the good games I described, we would say both parties got gold trading stamps. That is, they both felt good. In most games, the object is to get a bad feeling, oddly enough. It sounds like a weird thing to say, but that's what people play games for, is to get a bad feeling, like guilt or inadequacy or hurt feelings, and we call that a dirty brown trading stamp. That's their payoff.
Some payoffs are pretty gruesome. Suicide, alcoholism. Is there anything that transactional analysis can do, say in the case of alcoholism?
Well, we have a lot of our people who work in alcoholic clinics or clinics where they treat alcoholics, and we think we're really doing something rather interesting there. One of our aims, for example, is to cure the alcoholic so that if he wants to, he can drink socially. We don't say he has to drink socially, but the real cure would be, of an alcoholic, would be where the individual can drink socially, and we have many cases like that, I would say.
What happens when you have a case of an alcoholic, for instance? Obviously, something is behind the alcoholism. What happens when you take his game away?
Well, he has to find something else to do. That's what the problem that particularly so-called alcoholics run into is if they stop drinking, then they don't know what else to do, and they have an awful time filling their day in with things that interest them. They have a hard time finding action because they used to get their action from whatever happened while they were drinking.
How do you know that an alcoholic is cured, for instance?
When he stops drinking, a cured alcoholic is like anyone who's cured of playing games. The games are like a lot of trash in people's minds, and if they can get rid of those, we hope they come out fresh and they start seeing things again, maybe things they haven't seen since they were children, like ocean, birds, trees, and we're not, of course, sure that that's actually what happens, but that's what our contract is essentially. But if you get rid of the games and come on straight, you'll get better. And so far it seems to work.